Hey guys, welcome back to Fix It Friday, the weekly YouTube series where we talk about video game console repairs, mods, and restorations. And for this week, we have the NEC Turbografx. So what this is basically a handheld version of the Turbografx 16, and it was released right around the same time as the Game Boy. For those of you guys that don't know, the Turbografx 16, or the otherwise known as the PC Engine in Japan, is a 16-bit video game console that came out right around the same time as the Sega Genesis. It was the very first 16-bit system that was released. It has some really outstanding games. It's not a system that people know too well, and this handheld version of it is even more rare and hard to come by. So nowadays, if you find one of these, it's very common for them to be not working. They have these really poor quality surface mount capacitors that go bad over time, and it's actually really a complicated thing to repair because those capacitors can often do a lot of damage to the board. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to show you guys how to take apart this system, how to replace all of those capacitors in a safe kind of way, and we're going to take care of all that and see if we can get this thing coming back to life. All right, let's get started. All right, so we are going to start by taking this thing apart. It's very simple to take apart. All you need is a standard Phillips screwdriver, and there are 6 screws. There's 2 in the battery compartment, and then 4 here in the corners. And the 4 in the corners are these longer black screws, and in the battery compartment there are these tiny little white screws here. So just very simple to take apart and keep in mind where everything is. So once you take apart the system, you basically have a few ribbons to disconnect. So this one here is for the screen, this one here is for the controller and the sound, and this guy here is for power. You just pull up on them as you saw me do, and that gets everything all disconnected. This one here is for the batteries, just to provide power to the system, and this little guy here is for this extra controller port. Yeah, there we go. And that is used, I think, for a TV tuner accessory that this system had. Okay, so now that that's all finished, there's a single screw that also needs to be removed over here. And then once that's done, you can take apart the whole system, just like that. So you can see here some of the surface mount capacitors. They're all tightly packed. There's even more under here, so we're going to start by actually desoldering this RF shield, and once it's gone, we don't need to bother with bringing it back because it's completely unnecessary. So that's going to be the next step that we're going to get into. Alright, so I have the entire motherboard now removed from the shell, and this is the shield that we're going to remove. And so when you flip it over, what you'll find is that there are some larger points, and that's how this thing is anchored into place. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a desoldering gun and start getting those parts off. And yeah, you just want to be careful so that when you remove these, you don't scrape up the board when you're trying to pull them out, basically. So yeah, you can't fully access all of it. So what you gotta do is just come in kind of with your iron and heat up the tip. And then you see how I kind of stuck my fingernail underneath here and just pulled at the same time I was heating, and that allowed me to kind of get it free. You can also use a screwdriver for this too. Okay, there we go. So you can see now these 2 prongs are out. You got to be really careful because, you know, if you wiggle this back and forth, you're going to scrape up the board. You could cut traces. So I like to get these kind of twisted up like this once I set them free, so that they don't do any damage to the board. Remember, we're not going to bother with putting this thing back. It's completely unnecessary, and so I find it just much easier to do this. Okay, so let's continue. Okay, there's one more. right over here. Sorry if this is not coming out well on camera, but I'm gonna prioritize making sure that I get this done right. There we go. What I'm going to do now is just keep this little corner here and then pull upwards with my screwdriver. There we go, should be up now. Yep. There we go. So you can see now I've actually removed most of these, and usually what I'll end up doing is just kind of wiggling the last one off, which is here in the corner and really kind of inaccessible. So I'm just gonna pull this last guy up just in case so it doesn't potentially cause any damage when I wiggle. And yeah, now basically I'm just gonna kind of wiggle it back and forth. And that's 2. Finally. Alright, so now that the shield has been totally removed, I'm going to go through the steps through which I remove capacitors. So there's more than one way to do this. People are very strongly opinionated one way or the other. But I've given this board a quick once over. All of these, thankfully, have not done any extensive damage. So when they look like this and they haven't, you know, degraded the pads extensively, then I find that mechanically removing them is a lot easier than heating up the pads and trying to get them off that way. Either way, you run a risk of removing or damaging the pads, and then it becomes a lot harder to fix one of these. So what I'm going to do basically is I'm going to take these pliers, these with you can see that they're flat, they have teeth so they can grab onto the capacitor. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to twist side to side, but I'm not going to go up and down. So if you make that kind of side to side motion, you put mechanical stress on the legs of these things, and then the legs snap. And you can easily remove the capacitor without having to do any heating, extra heat on the board. So you can see I'm just kind of turning. You can turn in either direction, it really doesn't matter. But I'm just going to keep turning side to side until the cap comes loose, basically. Okay, here we go. Nice and easy. So now you can see there's little legs left over down here. I'm just going to snap those off. They're going to go flying across the room. And now I'm going to lift off this little plastic thingy. This is the base of the capacitor here. And you can see that the legs, the pads are safe, fully intact. There's a little bit of the legs remaining. So now what I'm going to do is just heat up my iron, get some fresh solder, and basically I just wipe forward with my chisel tip. And when I do that, the legs just kind of get removed. They stick to the iron instead, and I can just wipe them off. Now, I don't want to leave it like this because this is a mix of capacitor fluid and the pads. And so what I'm going to do next is just get my, you can either use soldering braid or you can use, since I have the gun, it's a lot easier. I'm just going to take my gun and just heat these pads up and just clean them off that way. So you see now the pads are totally clean. All that solder mixed with capacitor fluid is gone. And I'm going to come back in here and I'm just going to get some alcohol and clean that up real quick. Okay, so I have my Q-tip now, which has some 90% alcohol, and I'm just kind of going over the pads one more time with it, and you can see that this one was really not that bad, but now the pads are nice and clean. There's no trace of any electrolyte on there, and it's basically ready for a new capacitor. So in this particular case, what I did was I'm going to use these radial capacitors. You can use either surface mount or radial for the Turbografx. The surface mount are a little harder. I decided in this case just to use the radial because I think probably they're going to be more popular with people who are trying this. So what I do is I cut the legs off, and then I bend them like this so that they're kind of sticking out like that. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to trim off a little bit here of the excess. Just like that. Okay. So the stripe on these indicates the negative side, and you can see here on the board that there's a positive sign here indicating that the positive end of the capacitor goes here. So now at this point all I do is I come in with some fresh solder down, and I'm gonna go ahead and lock this into place. If it helps, you can also use like a, actually I'm gonna flatten this out a little bit more just so that it doesn't stand up too tall. So I'm just kind of pushing it on the floor of my workbench, and so you can see now that the legs are all nice and flat and just sticking out a little bit. So yeah, what I'm going to do now is just stand it upright and heat up one of these pads. And now that side is locked. And now I'm going to come around on the other side and do the same thing. So now it's in, but I'm going to just kind of push it down. And I'm going to come back to the original one and just give it some fresh solder. And there we go. Okay, so that one capacitor is good, ready to go. So I'm not going to bore you with doing all of these. I'm going to go ahead and take care of a whole bunch, and then I'm going to move over to another area which is generally more difficult and problematic and show you how I deal with that. Okay, back in a sec. Alright, so we are back, and as you can see, I have replaced the majority of the capacitors already. So all these little guys here, these are all brand new, and I replaced them in the exact same method that I described previously. So now I've deliberately left behind two troublesome areas that I'm going to show you. One is these 5 capacitors here, which these are required for audio. So they're really difficult because they're all bunched up on each other, and if they leak all over each other, and so if you're going to have damage, it tends to be in this area. So far this system has had no damage of any kind, and it's been very easy to clean up the mess. So that's great. The other area which people tend to have trouble with is right here. So these 2 capacitors, I believe that they're related to power, and they're completely coated in epoxy. So I'm going to show you how I remove those and replace those as well. Okay, so I'm going to start with these 2 capacitors that are coated in epoxy. And I'm going to show you that actually removing them is really basically the same as what I do with the others. So a little bit more work, a little more twisting involved, but basically you just twist them in the same manner you twist the others, and you can see that they're falling apart. That's pretty standard actually for them to do that. But yeah, you can twist them off right in place, and you'll see they're cracking, and that's because extensive damage from capacitor fluid leakage has already taken place here. That's fine. Doesn't matter because these guys are coming out. Alright. So now you can see the legs and you can see the pads. And so what I do is I just take a little X-Acto knife like this and just go down and just peel this stuff right off. You don't need to take out a lot, just enough so that you can see the entire pad, and that will do the job really. I'm not entirely sure why they put this here. I believe it's because there's some kind of coil here, and I think that's like a noise reduction attempt. Not entirely sure, really. But yeah, I'm just going to snip off these legs. They're going to go flying all over my bench. That's fine. And now with my fingernails, I'm just going to pull this out of the way. There we go. So you can maybe see this on camera, hopefully. but it is absolutely, totally covered in epoxy here. There's like really quite, I'm sorry, not epoxy. It's totally covered in electrolytic fluid. It's pretty bad, actually. So we're gonna clean all of that up before we even bother taking off the legs, because if I don't clean this up, it's gonna stink, it's gonna burn, it's gonna smell horrible, and you guys are on in YouTube, so you're not gonna smell it, but I sure as hell will, and I don't want to. So it's awful. Okay. Alright, so that's somewhat of it cleaned off. And now we're gonna go ahead and just do the exact same thing we did before. We're gonna... Oof, that smells horrible. There's still more here, of course. I'm just gonna remove those legs. There we go. Legs are out. And now I'm gonna come in with my desoldering gun and I'm gonna just get rid of all this crap. There we go. And yeah, now that the area is basically in good shape, I'm just gonna give it another once over with some alcohol and make sure like 100% that the stuff is out. And once that's finished, I'm gonna, yeah, see it's cleaning up really nicely now. Look at those nice shiny pads. All that capacitor fluid is out of here. Yeah, so I'm gonna install these two capacitors and then we're gonna move back over and talk about the sound area. Alright, so we are back, and this is the audio circuit. So you'll see that there's pads for 5 capacitors. One of them is a 100 microfarad 16 volt. These are 100 microfarad 10 volts, and then these two guys are 33 microfarad, I think like 6 volts or something like that. But anyhow, I removed the capacitors and cleaned up the pads in the exact same way that you guys saw me do earlier, and the important thing with this section is everything is very tightly packed, so you actually have to really plan out your attack very carefully. And so the way that I handle this is I usually tin up one pad and I leave one bare like this. And I work my way from back here forward, because if I do it the other way, there's too much stuff that's just surrounding here and it becomes really impossible to gain access to these areas if you start it any other way. So I always start back here, and what I do, like I said before, is I deliberately leave one pad very clean, and I come in. Sometimes also it helps, I think I am going to use a set of pliers to hold this down because it's crowded and it's really easy for my hands to kind of slip. So you can see I'm just holding that guy over. I'm going to heat up the one pad that I already have solder on. And then once it's hardened, I let go. You can see now that this pad here is perfect, and the leg is perfectly placed on there. So there we go. First guy is down, and I'm just gonna give this one a little more fresh solder. There we go. Okay, first one's down. So now I'm gonna take care of these two 100 microfarad capacitors. I'm gonna do the exact same thing I did before. I'm gonna grab my pair of pliers, and I'm gonna hold it down. It's gonna be a little tough to do on camera, but I'm gonna do my best here. Oops. Let's try that again. Straighten that guy out in a minute, but before I do that, I'm going to secure the negative leg over here. Kind of just rotate now. Hopefully this is, let's just see. Yeah, it's still on camera, great. I'm just going to slide my iron in here. Just melt a little bit more fresh on the positive leg there. Oh, look at that, actually. I put this guy in backwards. I'm glad I caught that now. So I made a mistake. You see how it says positive, negative, so this guy actually is going to be the other way around. It's kind of a good opportunity to teach you guys how to deal with that. So what I do is I'll heat up one leg and lift, and then do the same on the other side. no big deal. Okay, so let's do that again. It'll be a little tougher now, but so be it. Okay, positive lead is in, and I think I'm just going to do this one off camera because it's tough. Sorry about that, but oops. Wait a second. Here we go. There we go. So now it's in position. So we got 3 more to go. So I'm going to get this second 100 microfarad capacitor in. So, okay, that leg is heated up. Now I'm going to come in on the side, heat up the positive leg. And then just one more time here. And then I just like to straighten these guys out. It's just my OCD here. Everything's looking good. And we're going to rotate one more time. And then we're going to do those final 33 microfarad capacitors, which are tricky. But if you do it in this order, it makes it way, way simpler. That's the positive end. And last one. And these guys are in opposition, so you see positive here, and on this guy it's positive here. So always remember to read the board. Don't make a mistake like I did. Always proofread your work when you're doing this kind of stuff. Okay, last one is in, just like that. Alright, so I just wanted to show you guys the final capacitor that you remove, and this is the controller board that you can see here. And I already replaced the capacitor, it's right over here. It's very simple to remove. You just got to heat up these 2 pads right here, and then just put in the new one. But really what I wanted to call to your attention is the fact that that final capacitor can actually really do a lot of damage. So in this case, it actually didn't do anything. So you can see that all of these carbon traces for the buttons are intact and clean and totally working. But sometimes when this capacitor goes, it spills fluid all over this part of the board, and it destroys these carbon traces. And sometimes it just really makes it impossible to use these controllers anymore. If you find that that's the case for you, sometimes you can patch around the damage, but even if you can't, there's a replacement controller board that you can buy at pcemods.com, and I'm going to put a link in the description just in case you guys find yourself in that position. But yeah, in this case, I think we had a total success. Everything is nice and clean. There's no obvious damage. So I'm going to go ahead and put everything back together, and let's see if this thing is working again. Okay guys, so we are back. I've reassembled everything, and looks like this repair was a success. So all the buttons seem to be working. I still have to test out the turbo functions, but I'm sure that should be fine. And yeah, that's it. So we've got a fully working Turbografx. You can see that unlike the Game Boy, it has a backlit screen. The games look pretty good on this thing, and yeah, it's a really fun system to play, and there's a really nice library of games if you can get your hands on one. Alright, so I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please feel free to leave a thumbs up or put in some comments. It would be great if you guys could subscribe to the channel, as we're going to be putting out videos like this every week. Alright, so thanks again for watching, and I will see you guys again next time. Bye!